we'll move to the very first question, which is for Pushkin. So, firstly, Pushkin, I'd like to ask, why did you decide to write the paper to begin with?
Thank you for the question, Will. I decided to start writing the paper because I myself, as well as several loved ones around me, experienced mental health issues over the course of the pandemic, over lockdowns. A lot of also personal issues led to me experiencing difficulties mentally. So I wanted to get some support for myself. And it took, to say a long time is an understatement, from the period to when I was inquiring about support to now when I'm getting some support. It took about a year. It takes ages. And I'd say I was fortunate myself because in Oxford, we have, where I go to, where my education is, we have talking space, which is great, and you can access that. But I'm not sure if that's accessible everywhere, because when people around me tried to also get mental health support, they weren't as fortunate to be able to get such a program. They had to wait a very long time, and they had to get to a point where their mental health, I know one or two of my friends' mental health got so serious that they were suicidal, essentially. And that's when the health system decided to actually give them support. It's when they set a very high bar for you to pass. I'm not A, because what you're essentially saying is, unless you are on the verge of, the most serious mental health situation, you don't get any, or you get barely any support, and you have to wait ages. And even when I've gotten support, I have to still fight for it, because when I was referred to the program, there were still difficulties in getting in contact with them. You've got to take initiative. And if you have mental health issues, it's really difficult to take initiative, to take on certain people, to talk to them, to make sure I get the appointments. I shouldn't have to do that, but I had to, continuously phone people back who forgot to phone me. And it's horrifying, really. And for people with mental health difficulties, the system's nearly impossible to navigate. It feels like it's constantly set against you. And the really frustrating mental health is exactly climate change. It's one of those issues where politicians know full well the scale of the importance. They constantly talk about how important it is, and they do little or nothing. Whether they're Labour, whether they're Conservative, they've done little or nothing to support mental health properly. The reason why I want to do this, the reason why I'm generally into think tank action, is different things, and I doing a lot of really good things in relation to mental health, and I encourage them to continue. And I want to play a role in that. So that's why I've done the paper. And I'm really glad that it's gotten a lot of support, and I'm thankful for Centre Think Tank's help. But yeah, that's why I've written the paper. It's really important to me, and it's affecting a lot of people I care about. So I'm glad I've written it, and that's the reasoning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I really got over from your response there, Pushkin, was the sense of stigma that quite a lot of people face when going to mental health services and talking about mental health. So how do you think people can get over that stigma? How can we work to eradicate that stigma related to mental health and the issues that are connected to the mental health service? Pushkin, if you could start with that, and then I'll go to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, of course. Is my audio okay, by the way?
It's a bit crackly, but we can hear you.
Okay, and then so my internet's a bit dodgy. That's what you get in Warrington. But yes, I think in terms of stigma, I think a lot of it comes down to creating I'd say it's a difficult question, but I'd say much of it would come down to creating a system. So in my mental health paper, the aim was to create environments where we actively try to put mental health first. So whether in the workplace or in schools where we integrate CAMS with the schooling system, and so teachers can work more easily to create an environment for their students. I think it's integrating mental health support into our infrastructure as we have it now. And that in turn will let people see people around them accessing support. It'll be easier to access support. It'll become part and parcel of the conversation, because at the end of the day, if everyone's able to access support and there's tailored systems in place for them, over time, I'd hope that it would become part and parcel of an average conversation, really. That's my hope. That was part of what I want to achieve with the integration into sort of workplace, schools, and care homes and the current infrastructure we have now.
Absolutely, I think you're right to place that sort of emphasis not just on Parliament and the services themselves, but also related to schools and the education system as well, because that is something that's really important to get mental health education ingrained there as well. I'd like to turn now to Izzy, who is the Vice President of Centre at Aberystwyth University. Izzy, a similar question, the same question really. How do you think we can get over the stigma that is related to mental health and to make people not feel that there is a stigma talking about their mental health?
I first want to apologise for being late. I'm dog sitting at the moment. I think the stigma, because it's so ingrained in society as a whole and it's not a physical thing that you can see, people often don't take it into consideration and think of it as an actual illness. They view it as an excuse. I know I personally have been told that it's an excuse before in many areas of my life. In terms of trying to get over the stigma, I believe that we should actually campaign for a lot more awareness around mental health, the issues that it causes, the issues that we as mentally ill individuals face. Sorry, my tongue's a little bit twisted. So we need to think about like what we face. We need to actually make it people more aware of what happens within the brain almost.
Yes, absolutely.
That we can then kind of work with communities and actually help those individuals that are kind of stuck thinking, I feel like there's something wrong with myself, but I'm not entirely sure what it is, because some young individuals might have parents that don't believe it. Whereas working with the communities, we can then actually be like, okay, there is something here. Let's really get rid of all of this stigma.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right to hit upon the points that you did about trying to give people an insight into what is happening within the heads of people who are suffering from mental health issues, which quite often, you don't really get a sense of just by talking to people all the time. Now, Stephen, I'd like to turn to you again. The same question about stigma and the stigmatization associated with mental health and people needing to seek help. Was that something that you saw at all in Parliament? Was there something that you sort of encountered in terms of stigmatisation of mental health, or was there a good support network in Parliament when you were an MP?
Well, first off, I'd like to say I thought that was an outstanding report from Pushkin. I entirely agree with him. The only way forward is the whole integration with mental health services and provision with the physical health. There are obvious challenges there, Pushkin, that you identified, that you've got the county council social services providing a lot of provision and NHS the rest. But nonetheless, integration really from school all the way up. I think that's the only way forward. Well, in answer with Parliament, I'm aware there was mental health provision in Westminster. How good or bad it is, I don't know. So all I can do is focus on policy issues. Izzy and Pushkin are absolutely right. It's around awareness. What I will just say is there is literally, we are on a different planet of mental health awareness compared to 20 years ago. My mother was bipolar. I was the one in the family who could manage it and cope with it. And we're so far ahead to what we were years ago, which is a plus. I'm only putting that in as context. There's still a great distance to go, which both Izzy and Pushkin have identified. The interesting thing is government, I now believe, gets it. But what Pushkin pointed out quite cogently is that means they now talk about it all the time, but the delivery is still way behind. Now, it's not much consolation at the minute, I'm sure, but the fact that they get it is a bloody plus, because 15 years ago, they just didn't get it. They really didn't. On the moving it forward to delivery, that's where things get really, really difficult. But I do think that's where Pushkin's report is the only way forward, and that is it becomes normalized because it's integrated from school onwards. Is he touched from own personal experience of the challenges? Yes, they are there. And I think the only way that will change is if it gets pushed down from an awareness perspective in the schools. Push it hard in the schools, it'll become more and more normalized. Kids are incredible. When you're really young, you can adapt so quickly, you really can. And the more that we manage that at a younger age, I think that will have considerable benefits. From my own perspective as an MP, I was also the vice chair of the APPG on mental health for the first few years. And I knew there were a number of MPs who were very open about their own mental health experiences, and that was very helpful within Parliament, because human nature is we hear better from people like ourselves. And so MPs were standing up, talking about the mental health experience a few years ago. I think that made a real difference. From a constituency perspective, it's just awful. It varies from area to area, but I did a lot, me and my team, we did a lot of support for mental health, had a hell of a lot of mental health constituents coming our way, and the provision sometimes was so bad, it was just, I don't even want to think about it. Again, I think Pushkin hit the nail on the head. You got provision, Pushkin, because I can imagine you fought like hell every inch of the damn way. The reality of human beings and of mental health is, A, some people aren't capable of pushing. That's where they need either MP, social workers, NHS, whatever. Or B, even if they are capable of pushing, they just don't know where to go. So it is still a major problem. Stigma, of course, it's still there without a single shadow of doubt. I do think it's less, folks, simply because I'm so bloody old. I remember what it was like. But I'm not sanguine at all. I think we need to keep pushing this report. You guys, all of us need to keep pushing for awareness. As for the silver bullet of getting parity between mental health and physical and clinical or what have you, that we all need to aim for that. We really do. God knows when we will, but it hopefully in your lifetime. But that is definitely the way forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important, as you mentioned there, Stephen, to focus on some of the difficulties that people have on a constituency level, on a day-to-day basis, with just being able to get access to mental health services. Torin, I'd like to turn to you now. How do you think we can get over some of the stigma related to mental health, and how do you think we can improve awareness as well?
So I think a large amount of what I was going to say is kind of being covered already, in terms of ensuring it's embedded into sort of every level of society and of life. But in some ways, I think it's helpful to sort of think about what happens when you have a mental illness versus a physical illness. Because if I was to break my leg, for instance, I know exactly where to go, right? I know exactly that I can go to A&E. I know exactly that I will probably get an appointment within the next few hours. I know how it will be treated, and therefore I'm much more certain that I will have a good outcome in that system. Whereas if I'm thinking about mental health, then suddenly it turns into much more of a labyrinth. It's effectively going into the system and hoping that if I push hard enough, as Pushkin said, that actually you can get something from the system, that you can get treatment, which from a patient's perspective, of someone going into the system who already needs help, is not a particularly sort of nice end outcome. So I do think that the biggest step forwards will be integrating mental health services further into the NHS, and basically ensuring that coverage extends to as many people as possible. Because of course the big worry is that if we don't do that, it's going to hit education standards, it's going to continue to hit schools, and it's going to continue to hit businesses. And so we genuinely, if we don't do it, there's a massive price. And of course, if we do, there are some massive outcomes. And I think one of them will be reducing that stigma, making it normal to get mental health treatment, making it normal to get treatment quickly. And I think in some ways, parity between mental health and physical health almost stands for something a lot bigger, which is everyone knows that they have a body and everyone knows it can get damaged. But there's this bizarre thing, I think, talking about mental health, where in general, it almost feels like the same isn't true with mental health. At the end of the day, we all have brains and we can all end up with being damaged, just like physical health, but it isn't seen that way, honestly. So I think that will be the biggest step, is to be able to push that kind of awareness and that kind of system that goes along with it, that basically says, actually, anyone's mental health can be damaged, and it's everyone's issue to make sure that that system is fixed. Because if you ever need it, and the statistics are quite shocking in the sense that we know a lot of people in their lifetime will need it, whether it's isolation at old age or problems at school and work, then honestly, it is everyone's issue to fix the system.
Absolutely, and I think you're totally right to point out the need for everyone to be involved, because, as you say, it is something that can affect anybody at any point in their lives. Now, I'd like to move on to the next question, which is, what do we think could be the single biggest thing that we could do to improve mental health support within the UK, and why do we think that this one thing, if we were only able to do this one thing, that it would be the single biggest change to mental health support? Pushkin, if you could start.
Yes, thank you. It's an interesting question, and with no disrespect to you, well, I think I'm gonna answer it by saying I don't think there is, if I'm brutally honest. I think it's a very complicated issue. I think part of the issue is that we've been trying to find one biggest thing to do, and then we've been trying to just want to implement that one biggest thing and focus on that one big. I think there's any one big thing you can do, because a lot of mental health support relies on a consistent system. So what I want to create was a system that carried you from cradle to grave, and looked after you, and you had a health and happiness first environment. And I want to create a health and happiness first economy. I want to create this thing throughout your life, throughout anyone's life. You can access support, and I think there's no single biggest thing, because every solution relied on the solution earlier when you're in education, or solution later in work, or even later in old age. Every solution relied on the other to be as effective as another solution. So, with no disrespect at all, your questions are brilliant, but I think I'm inclined to disagree that there's any one big solution. I think it's all very important, whether it's destigmatizing mental health to making it in parity with physical health. It's all interconnected, as Stephen, Torrin, Izzy, everyone really is covered that, if we want to help destigmatize, we need to get parity. If we want to solve the issue, we need to destigmatize and have parity. All these things are very much interconnected and as important as each other. So I don't think there's any one big thing. But I'm obviously, if anyone does have any ideas, I'm not going to knock you for it. Fair enough, but that's my opinion on the matter.
Izzy, what do you think could be the one major thing, if it was to be changed, that could improve mental health support in the UK?
I think I'm going to have to go with Pushkin's answer. I'm not piggybacking the answer. It covers the whole thing. There is no one thing. There is no one definite answer. There is a system of answers and different layers towards doing it. There's no big answer.
Stephen, what do you think? Do you think that there is one thing, or do you agree with the other people on the panel that it couldn't be put down to one simple thing to be changed?
Both, in the sense that both Izzy and Pushkin are right. One of the whole challenges of mental health is the complexity of it. You can have schizophrenia on one level, to someone having acute depression on the other and all points in between. It's just absolutely massive. However, if I had a magic wand, what I would have is I'd have clarity of provision. It's just too damn difficult when you've got social services, community care dealing with one area, you've got NHS dealing, psychiatry dealing in other areas, within institutions, within hospitals. It's just too much. Mental health is complicated enough as it is. And so what I would do, if I had a magic wand, is I'd be really brave and I would have one service that would be sustainable both within the community, because community is crucial, because you want to try and get to, or we want to try and ensure that people know they can get to someone within the community quickly. I mean, Torrin hit that nail on the head. I break my leg, I know exactly where to go to A&E. I have a mental breakdown, I haven't got a clue. My family doesn't have it's just chaos. And by the time you finally get somewhere, more often than not, the person concerned is iller than they were before. So I would have absolute radical clarity of provision under one aegis that works both within the NHS and within community services, so people know instantly where to call or where to go. It is doable. I'm absolutely convinced of it. I think Pushkin's kind of given the whole framework of how it's doable. The interesting issue, Pushkin, I can tell you as politician, is actually you will get pushback from all the different professional groups who quite like their little silos. Never, never, never underestimate the capacity for groups in their silos to push back. I'm only flagging that because it's just worth remembering. It's not always just the hopeless politicians or the hopeless this, the hopeless that. It's quite often people quite like the fact that they're in complete control in their areas. But anyway, that's by the by. I'd have absolute clarity, a mental health service that is run from the NHS, is run from social services, but it's under one particular framework. I think that would make one hell of a difference.
Absolutely, and I think you make a very clear point there, Stephen. Torrin, what do you think? What kind of thing would you change if you could make any change, or do you think, as Pushkin and Izzy have suggested, that perhaps it couldn't be one change that could make a massive difference instantly?
I would have to say, so we've been pushing for quite a long while for this idea of an NHS umbrella, essentially bringing things under the NHS, like social care, like mental health. And I honestly do think that such an idea will get a fair bit of pushback, as Stephen said. I mean, it's always been the way. I mean, it's easy to forget, considering we weren't around, but when the NHS was formed, a lot of doctors and nurses really disliked the idea of unifying everything under one service. I think it was the British Medical Association that was actually quite against the idea of a single state-run national health service. So honestly, I think it will get pushback, and it will take a brave government to basically push something like that forwards, and say this is our priority, to unify it under one system. But the honest thing is, in some ways, it's something that we can't afford not to do, and it will have a financial cost if we don't do it. So I think it will not be the most popular move ever, but at the same time, it is one of the most necessary things that we need to do.
Absolutely, and I think you have to make the point there, Torrin, that sometimes good policy and policy that can actually change people's lives isn't always necessarily that popular. I'd like to move on to the next question now, which is related to education, because of course a lot of people in the education system at different points struggle with their mental health. So what can we do to the education system to make it more accommodating for people who have mental health problems and need help, and do it in a way that makes it so that they aren't put off from seeking help? Izzy, if you could start.
I quite like this question. I think that actually teaching children from a primary school age about mental health, just nothing too dire, but just learning about the basics of it will then, going back to the early question, get rid of some stigma, and also teach the children that it's okay to feel like this, and they can now put labels on it and they can understand it, and then as they get further through the education system they can learn more about it, they can learn to recognize signs in their friends, they can help their friends and themselves as well, and maybe teach the further community.
Absolutely, and I think you're right that often education in the school system is a great way to reach out to the rest of the community and help them be connected with some of the mental health conditions that people in schools and universities, etc., are feeling. Pushkin, the same question. What do you think we can do to the education system to make it better for people who need help with their mental health?
Yeah. I'd like to sort of think I really like Izzy's answer, actually. Very, very well, very good answer. And I fully agree. I think that that's a very strong point. It needs to be from a very early age. The idea needs to start rolling, the ball needs to start rolling. I think that plays a key role in the point I'm going to make is that we need, and what my paper aimed to do was to create a system that was easy to access and that actually was implementable in schools. And the point is that the school, nearly every child will go to school, and most of them will go to a state, and so a big part of mental health in young people will come in school environment. It'll be stress from exams, stress from friend groups, or just generally mental health issues that might not have to do with anything but inherent mental health issues. And a lot of it can be dealt with at the school level. And I think what my paper aims to put forward is that we have a system where we have a very simple, you're referred to support, and that the support is coordinated with the school, and thus the school can implement a good support program for every child. And I think the important thing there is that with mental health, there's diverse needs. And I think Steve made this point earlier with, there's a varying level. There's different health issues, varying level. There's a lot to it. So there's a diverse need. And so if we can create a system where people's individual plans can easily be implemented in environments like schools, where you'll face a lot of pressure and stress and be as a child for a while, if we can have something that's easily implementable for every individual in the school environment and can be easily coordinated with therapists and health support, then I think you've reached a system where you've got a very strong safety net for children. And if anything, I think it has amazing knock-on effects for education. If you can have a strong mental health system, you can really, healthy and happier schools. And I mean, I don't even need to say better educational outcomes for everyone. And it is really leveling up, by the way. I just want to make that clear. If you really want to level up, you need to make sure that every region, every constituency, every part of the country, it cannot be that Oxford has better mental health support than Warrington. It cannot be that London has better mental health support than Manchester. I don't know that for a fact, but it can't be that every area has different levels of mental health support. It needs to be a consistent system that works for every individual, not just one constituency or another. It needs to work for every single person. And that's how you create an equal starting line for everyone in life, so that people can really achieve when they work hard. And we're not just saying that this plan will aim to implement a system where everyone has a good chance at life and that happiness which they deserve.
Absolutely, I think you're really right to focus on the need for consistency across the country, because that's obviously something that you've touched upon there, and I think a lot of people have experienced where there are varying degrees of support in different parts of the country. Stephen, if I could turn to you now, what do you think we could do to make the education system better for those who are suffering from mental health, those who need help with it?
I mean, I can be short on this because Izzy, I think, got it completely spot on with the fact of awareness from a very, very young age, talking about it. And then Pushkin's just summarised absolutely, I think, how it can be done. It's got to be consistent. It's got to be a clear provision. There's got to be trained people who know what to do, how to manage it. All the answers in Pushkin. So very unusually for a politician, I shall keep my answer short. I'm with Pushkin and Izzy.
Well, there's nothing wrong with a short answer. Torin, what do you think? How can we make sure that the mental health system is better for people?
So I'll give a slightly longer answer because I think I'm going to say something that is quite different in terms of mental health at schools, and that is exams. Because I think a lot of the time when we're talking about sort of mental health provision in schools and sort of how we focus on it, obviously a large chunk of the fight will be around better provision for people who have mental health issues. But obviously another big section is actually preventing mental health issues in the first place. And I think, a lot of the stuff that I've done has been, looking at education systems and looking at more specifically exams within those systems. And I would say the UK has gone a bit over the top in terms of testing kids. Because I was sort of looking at what a normal sort of set of exams that a student will do in their life. And like at the moment, the government is introducing something called baseline tests. And they start within the first few weeks of getting into primary school. And then they'll move on to SATs after that. And then after that, they'll end up, if they're in a selective area, moving on to the 11 plus. And then once they've done that, then they'll probably end up doing GCSEs, A levels, or BTECs, depending on what they go for, and then perhaps a degree at the end of it. And so I think what we're starting to see is this sort of overuse of testing. And in an educational sense, it's not fantastic in the sense that we end up spending so much time doing testing. But the other impact of it is, of course, that when you're doing what's sort of known as high stakes tests, essentially you sit at the end of the year and you get 2 exams that decide exactly how you've done for an entire year of school, it's a bit of pressure. And I remember that from my own time doing A levels and GCSEs. It's a lot of pressure for students. So I think honestly part of it will be getting rid of some of those tests. The 11 plus, for instance, a lot of people, the majority of people don't pass that test. And the one thing that I found when I was on the board of Comprehensive Future was you had people saying the same thing, which was, well, I failed the test. I decided, well, actually, I felt like a failure, and that honestly was a difficult thing to hear. But I do think it has a fundamental impact of what tests can do, and the fact that actually we do need to probably get rid of things like baseline and SATs and the 11 plus, and probably streamline GCSEs. Again, it's another thing. It will come with pushback. Certainly on the 11 plus, we've found that it will come with pushback. But again, some of the things that are worth doing will. And I honestly think it will have not only benefits educationally, but also, of course, in terms of the actual benefits to students and their mental health.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to make the point relating to testing, because it's something that quite clearly does have a very detrimental effect on particularly school-aged children when they are forced to regularly hit a particular standard and do test after test after test and learn to test. And it isn't something that is particularly helpful. I think we can all agree. I'd like to turn now to the next question, which is on businesses. Businesses obviously have to make a profit, because if they don't make a profit, then they won't be able to continue to function. But they do also need to have proper facilities and proper help for those people who are working in the businesses who may have mental health issues or may be suffering in some way or another. So how can we make sure that businesses, that the private sector is doing all it can to ensure that there are good mental health provisions for people who are working in them? Pushkin, if you could start.
Absolutely. I think it's a difficult one, because I think there's a lot that, a lot of people are in that place, and there's a lot that can be done. I think the difficulty there is, unlike schools, for instance, if we touch on the earlier topic, obviously private workplaces are their own place. They're all individual areas. We can't just necessarily coordinate. So I think what we aimed to do was to create a system where it didn't cost small businesses, it didn't put them any further behind bigger businesses. We'd subsidize support. We made sure that people who are contracted by businesses are under their plan. So there are a lot of people who can be forgotten in these plans that we want to make sure are involved. But for the bulk of it, for the bulk of workers who are directly employed by a business, I think it's important that we create a framework that every business can work with. And that's what we aim to do. And I think the important thing here is that we want to implement the idea of collective bargaining, where workers and businesses can both discuss, the people who know the most about their environment can both discuss legally binding mental health plans and general rights and improve workers' rights. And I think mental health is synonymous with other issues. I think mental health is synonymous with workers' rights. I think we need to strengthen workers' rights. And I think part of that comes from companies talking. And I understand there might be slight pushback with people saying, oh, this is a newly left idea and this is crazy. What's next? Workers run their cooperatives. I mean, it's not too crazy. But I think, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that left-wing of an idea. I think businesses and company boards and workers have a lot more in common. And they have that they want to be productive. They want to be safe. They want to be in a good environment. And in turn, the company boards want them to be productive. The company boards want them to work well. And they've both got a common interest. So an important policy for me in the business side of things is the collective bargaining, because I think it's key that workers and company boards work together for the betterment of the business. And I think there's never been enough placed on the fact that the productivity crisis, there's an issue here. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that workers need to be heard on boards. They have it in other countries, it works perfectly fine. I think companies, workers need to be heard. And I think what companies will find is that they have a lot more in common with their workers. And if you can create that unity between worker and company, then I think, you've got stronger workers' rights, you've got a happier worker base, but we're strengthening mental health rights without, big government backs and, trying to clumsily tell businesses what to do. But again, it's individual plans for every individual, but we're leaving to create them. And yeah, that's why I think it's important for businesses. It's that they work with work.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to focus on individuality again there, because of course every individual is different, and the circumstances in which they will find themselves will be different as well. Izzy, the same question: what do you think businesses can do to help people who may be suffering from mental health issues?
I think Pushkin's done a very fantastic answer to this one. I think creating that rapport and that awareness between the employer and the employee, no matter the size of the business, is a very crucial thing. I'm going to touch on personal experiences where because I suffer from depression, I've gone into work and I've had bosses that get so defensive because they don't quite understand why I still have to go to work and why I'm still there. But then sitting down with my employer and actually being like, look, this is the ins and outs. I'm just having an off day. I'm still okay to work. They actually began to understand and recognize when I was a little bit off and was having a bit of a difficult time. So I think creating that rapport is a very, very crucial thing in the business.
Yeah, and I think you're entirely right there, Izzy, to focus on sometimes the personal rapport that is needed between the employer and the employee to fully understand the mental health problems that are perhaps going on. Stephen, on this point, what do you think businesses can do to help people who may need support?
Well, two things. Remember, there's corporate and there's SMEs, and they are literally chalk and cheese. So if you're BP or Lloyd's Bank or what have you, you're going to have a huge HR department, and then if you're the local builder down the road with 3 staff, it's a completely different situation. It's really, really important for any policymakers when they're thinking in terms of how do we get good mental health support and provision into business, never, never, ever confuse the fact that they're one great big mass, because it's just so different. It's unbelievable. The second thing is actually what I think Pushkin's paper is about, and that is what we've been talking about through this morning, is the more awareness there is, not just of mental health, but about where to go when there's a problem. That is the solution. If you're a small business, you know, you're juggling 50 different balls 24/7, and what you need is simplicity. And I also actually think that applies for corporate. So the more we get, we get the system in place, and I go back to this one integrated service, frankly. I mean, I really think we should go bang for buck for this. The more that we get it in place, so people understand, okay, my member of staff, I've got a little bit of awareness of mental health, my member of staff talking to me, she is obviously having an issue. I understand where I need to go. It's very simple. I pick the phone up. Then you can get some real progress. What you can't do, because it just won't work, is to rely on small businesses to be wholly proactive, because frankly, most of them 24/7 are hanging on by, well, you know, I'm exaggerating a bit, but a lot are hanging on by the fingertips. And even if they don't, the owner's working 24/7, because you tend to do that when you're an SME. So you've got to make it simple for them. The awareness part, which again is in Pushkin's paper, and Izzy's been talking about it, from primary school onwards, will just normalise it. And I really do believe we're making progress that situation, simply because I'm old enough, I know what it was like X number of years ago. But to sort it for businesses, make it straightforward for them so they know where to call. And then on the corporate side, I think having worker representation on boards, which is not just about mental health, it's about a whole range of things. You know, the Telegraph and Mail would scream blue bloody murder, but it seems to have worked in Germany pretty well, and I'd imagine a few other countries as well. So I think that's also a good idea and would help. But the main thing, one unified provision, one unified service, awareness, and making it easier for businesses, particularly SMEs, to know who to call for help.
Absolutely. I think you made some very valuable comparisons between the situation in Britain and what is often seen in parts of Europe. Torin, if I can turn to you now, what do you think businesses can do to help people who may need help with their mental health?
I do in part think it's about helping those smaller businesses. I mean, I saw during when I was working on the excluded issue, where people hadn't been able to access government financial support during the pandemic, that a lot of people found it very, very difficult, not only to access support, but also just to get listened to. You know, it's quite easy to get listened to if you're a business with thousands of employees. When you have, say, 20 employees or 3 employees or say 100 employees, it's much more difficult to get your voice heard at the table and to get government kind of to listen to you, which is why I am very happy that this kind of includes not only measures for those sort of larger businesses that, you know, will benefit an enormous amount from you know, tackling mental health issues. Their productivity will benefit, less sick days, that's another benefit, you know. So there is a lot of benefits for those businesses in terms of, you know, tackling mental health problems. But I think as well, there are other things that we can do sort of alongside it to support people who are struggling basically within their businesses. You know, we've put in what I suppose you could almost describe as the last line of defense with a sort of guaranteed minimum income, which is effectively this idea of if you are basically below the poverty line, then it is getting the government to step in and pay you in a way that is a much more simplistic version than sort of universal credit. So there's stuff like that which we can do, which simplify the existing benefit system, which even the Adam Smith Institute, which is quite a right-wing organisation, has actually endorsed as something that they would support, and has endorsed as something that would actually save money because of the reduction in bureaucracy. So there is a lot of things that we can do, not just within workplaces, but also outside of it, that will support employees if they, either need to leave their workplace, or on the other hand, to ensure that they can stay in that workplace, whether they are a small business or a big business, effectively allowing all of them to have better mental health overall.
Absolutely. I think you've raised some really important points there, Torrin. I'd now like to turn to our last set question. There'll be one question after that, but they don't know what it is, which is loneliness is something that affects a great many people in the UK, and also is something that particularly affects the elderly and can damage their mental health. So what can we do to make loneliness, and in particularly the loneliness felt by elderly people, something that doesn't impact their mental health as much, or to reduce it entirely? Izzy, if you could start with this one.
Very good question. I believe it's becoming a lot more into consideration within the last, say, 5 years, but actually bringing the community together, I believe, is going to be a very big thing to assist within the loneliness of the elderly. A lot of them they'll be placed in care homes, or they might not have family around them. I know personally my family is very scattered around the UK, that it's quite difficult to go and see each other. But I think actually having, say, school children come in on a weekend or within half terms, and actually looking after and taking care of the elderly. I can't remember the specific name for it, but there was a discussion the other day where you would have kind of primary school children and nursery age children coming into the care homes and actually running around and encouraging the elderly to get up themselves and become more lively again, giving them kind of someone to look after, but at the same time somewhere to have fun, watching the children grow, teaching them the things that they know, and being able to just bring a lot more smiles to the community, and coming all together to assist each other as one cohesive unit, I believe is very important.
Absolutely, and I think that issue that you pointed out of a bridging of the age gap is very important, isn't it? Pushkin, same question. What do you think can be done to help people who are suffering from loneliness, particularly the elderly, to ensure that their mental health isn't damaged by loneliness?
No, of course, it's a very prevalent issue, and I think a lot of my research at that point in the paper, a really good. I think it was Mind UK. I looked at a lot. They got some very good stuff on this actually, and I really recommend people go and check out what they have to say. But I'd say a lot of it does come down to community, and you make very good points about intergenerational care and connecting people. I think part of connecting people, I know that I read a report where they sort of put it into, they sort of separate it into different categories. I can't really remember, but I think it's like finance, accessibility to transport, all these different things need to be addressed. So I think, so when it comes to finance, we have the a guaranteed top-up scheme, which is again similar to the guaranteed minimum income. Finance-induced stress does have a big effect on mental health. So I think that's important. We want to introduce better infrastructure for Wi-Fi and technology so that older people can phone loved ones at a distance, because I think that's important. I think there's a lot of things we can do. I think, but so a lot of solutions I want to put in here that, I could put loads of solutions here, because every issue is in relation to this. If we improve the general infrastructure for transport in terms of trains and buses, then, it's going to have a knock-on effect for elderly people. So I think there's every issue, there's a lot of solutions here. But I think a really big one is making social care accessible. And I think what we want to do, what I put in my paper, with the help of China's think tank, and what we want to do is we want to create a free at the point of use, nationalised social care system, I think that's important, and I think we do that with a ring fence fund from income tax for those who are younger, but for those who are just entering or haven't been around long enough to pay that ring fence into that ring fence fund, we fund it immediately, increasing dividends, capital gains taxes, increasing minimum to an income tax level. But creating free at the point of youth social care would mean that an intergenerational social care, actually, as Easy pointed out, and I think Torrin loves to talk on so much, so I can't wait to hear him go into that in more depth. But free at the point of use and generational care would create an easy infrastructure system for old people to go into, and for people to have faith that their grandparents, that their friends, that the elderly people in their life can get the care they deserve after so many years of hard work, after contributing to our country, our culture, our economy. People deserve to be protected at an old age, and I want to create a system, a social care system that's the envy of the world, and I think we really can do that. We need to be bold. We need an intergenerational. We need to nationalise it. We need to create it free at the point of use. But I think that will go a hell of a long way in creating accessible infrastructure that old people can check into, and that they can have the support and not be lonely, and get this, and we can create a system within those care homes. And it's a lot easier to create a system in the care homes to support old people than to support every individual across the country. So I think that's a very important element of decreasing loneliness and generally supporting mental health, because I think we also need to recognise that, I make the point in my paper, as mental health deteriorates, you then lead on to physical ailments, and other mental ailments such as lots off the top of my head, but it costs tens of billions to the economy every year. Deteriorating mental and physical health for old age pensioners. So I think it's important that we recognise there are the knock-on effects, and it is expensive not to deal with mental health. It is. The knock-on effects are very costly for UK society. So I think it's better that we deal with mental health. I think this goes for every level of society. We deal with mental health at the root. I think, a big part of that is free at the point of use, nationalised social and generational care.
Absolutely, and I think also the point that you made relating to infrastructure is really important as well, because it's something that obviously not only helps with mental health issues, but a lot of other problems that we face in Britain at the moment. Stephen, if I could turn to you, what do you think we can and we should be doing to deal with mental health conditions that are related to loneliness that many elderly people suffer from?
Again, two things. There's older and elderly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say older, sort of 65, 70 plus, elderly over 80, just as a kind of distinction, because there are very definite distinctions. A lot of people now in their late 60s into their 70s are much fitter than their parents were by a huge, huge margin. In my day, if you had got to 70, 72, 73, you were an old man. Nowadays, people of 75 are going on cruises and racing cars, and the world's changed. What hasn't changed is loneliness, because the flip side of the world changing and us getting fitter and richer and what have you is families have become more atomized. In the old days, you had much more a nuclear family. And the reality is that nuclear family looked after their grandparents, grandma, granddad. There was that nucleus, which had some downsides, I'm sure, but the upside is it obviated loneliness. In Eastbourne, which, by the way, there's nowhere as many old people in Eastbourne as the stereotype says, but out of 100,000 people, there are about 25,000 who are over 65, 75, whatever. So it's quite high, it's 25%. I did some work with a guy, very sadly, his wife died of dementia. He was going through really, really sad time, but he went through a sad time when she was ill, and then when he died, he was very lonely. He's 90 years old, for God's sake, but he got off his backside a few years ago, and he started a charity called Just Friends. For Eastbourne. What I can tell you is within about 18 months, had 500 members. And these are people from, let's call them 68 to 85, give or take. Now, what was interesting, because as the MP, I supported it, and I went along and I visited, and And what was so interesting, this was normal, ordinary people who are older, who are just on their own and lonely as sin. And Just Friends transformed their lives. And that really brought home to me just how pernicious loneliness is, how much of a problem it is, and how, relatively speaking, how fixable it is. You know, you go to Izzy's thing of the schools making arrangements with different care homes. If you're looking at the elderly, sending kids in, I think that's a brilliant idea. It has been done. Why not have that as part of Pushkin's one straightforward national service that you go to schools and explain to them how it can be done? The schools contact the care homes. It's doable. And I think that would make a hell of a difference for a lot of older people in care homes. It'd be frightening to the kids at first. You know, when you're 6, 8, 9 years old and there's an 85-year-old man or woman, it's spooky. It is, you know, because you're not used to what you're not used to. But kids are great. You know, you chuck them in a flipping forest, they'd adapt within 24 hours. So I think that's a good idea. But what I would do is I'd put it under the aegis of this thing that Pushkin keeps talking about, that we've been alluding to, type of grass and net for one service that covers both NHS and social service, but it's one service. And it would do all those sort of things that he's talking about, or not do them. It would help raise the awareness in schools that they can do it. And then on the Just Friends thing, I think the voluntary sector has a huge role to play in this, because loneliness is a really weird emotion. First of all, it's god awful. Secondly, it's pernicious. Thirdly, it's embarrassing. 68-year-old man or woman, successful life, family disappeared, whatever, to admit you're lonely, it's embarrassing. It's humiliating, you know, and that's really important that we understand that and acknowledge that. And the reason I mention it is that's where I think the voluntary sector has a role, because I don't think this service that we're talking about, I think it can facilitate, but I don't think it can go and fix the loneliness for a lot of these older people, because apart from anything else, they won't admit to it. And secondly, it'll be embarrassing, because this isn't people who've reached a point of mental health breakdown. These are people of which I believe there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions in this country, who are just lonely. And it's finding a way to help them interconnect with other human beings. That's what I saw with Just Friends. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. The kids thing would be lovely from Izzy, for the care homes, etc. For the rest, I think it's this service providing some templates with the voluntary sector, saying, why don't you do this? Some already doing it, Age Concern, Age UK, do, you know, visiting friends or what have you, but that's actually for care homes. What I found, or what I've identified the last few years, is that cohort who have left work, their kids have left home, they could be only 65, 66, 67, up to 75, and for one reason or another, they're on their own. And you would be amazed. I was gobsmacked how many there are. Absolutely hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And that is a group that I believe, if we don't assist in some kind of support, you know, like the Just Friends through the voluntary sector, what have you, I believe that will deteriorate into mental health problems if it's not actually recognized and dealt with. And to be blunt, do it unashamedly, because I cannot stress to you that one of the key things I learned was the embarrassment of loneliness. So we need to be aware of that as we deal with it, but it's a major issue.
I think you made some excellent points there, Stephen, and I think particularly focusing on the issue of embarrassment and the voluntary sector, like Just Friends, is something we really have to keep in mind with this particular issue. Turning to you now, Torin, what do you think we can do to tackle the loneliness problem that affects many elderly people and many people over a certain age?
I mean, I think it comes in two parts. I mean, obviously, one is, I would say, intergenerational care, which, as Pushkin said, I could go on for all day about. I think the idea behind that is obviously fantastic in terms of bringing together young people and obviously people in care homes, and obviously that not only improves the mental health and the physical health of a lot of the older people, and it not only helps those younger people who then are becoming, not only more active, but they're learning from those older people in those settings. But then, of course, it brings in the mums and the dads. And then, so it basically, that in itself will start to sort of repair some of the community that I think during this pandemic has kind of been lost, from having to isolate. Because as much as a lot of communities have come together during the pandemic, also being socially isolated, being sort of locked away has made it more difficult, especially for a lot of elderly people who don't have as much either access or ability to use technology. And I think the other thing, and the thing that will help a lot of those who are kind of outside of those age ranges, as Stephen said, the people who aren't quite in care homes are younger than that. For those people especially, I think community hubs will be an enormous thing to push forwards, because we have I have one down the road from me. I'm in Hertfordshire, but just on the border of Cambridgeshire. So we've changed sides multiple times as to where we are, between Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire. Just over the border in Cambridgeshire, there is a fantastic community hub there. And I think that from a very young age, when I, leafleting when I was sort of 14 kind of thing, I used to go back to there, and that had lots of activities on. And it was a fantastic place in terms of bringing the community together in a way that wasn't about, saying, oh, well, you're obviously lonely, or you must have a mental health problem. It was a very open space where anyone could kind of go and meet up and chat, even if it's just for a coffee, or it was to do activities with other people. And those kind of things, I think, are fantastic, not just for loneliness in older people, but also in younger people as well, and getting people involved in community, I think, after the pandemic.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important, as you say, to make the comparison between how it is dealt with in particular areas and in other areas. We're now going to move on to my final question before we go to the Q&A section. This is something that Torin has specifically requested, so I'll be asking him the question first. But it's coming up to Halloween. In fact, it's Halloween tomorrow. So for the panel, if you were invited to a Halloween party and you had to go to the Halloween party as a political figure from the past 100 years, specifically the past 100 years, who would you go as? Torin, as it was you who requested it, could you respond first?
I have put this on myself, haven't I? Well, what I'm going to say is, before I got my hair cut, my nickname was Margaret Thatcher, because it started to grow long and curl. So I would probably end up coming as Margaret Thatcher, considering my now ex hairstyle. It looks much better. The barber did an amazing job of removing quite a lot of hair, and we've begun to them for years. So it's quite useful that they knew how to cut, as I said, what was extremely long hair. But yes, I would have to say I'd grow my hair out again if I could, or not get the haircut, and go for that.
Fantastic answer. Pushkin, who would you go to a Halloween party as? Political figure from the past 100 years.
This is this is a well of a question. Goodness. Can you come back to me? Would that be okay? Can I?
Yeah, no, of course you can. Okay, you can defer for the moment. I mean, it's all Torin's fault, so you can blame him. I wasn't going to ask any question like this, but he insisted. Stephen, if you had to go to a Halloween party as a political figure from the past 100 years, who would you go as? I mean, of course you could go as yourself, but if you went as someone else, who would you go as?
That is such a random question from Torrin. Absolutely random. First of all, my generation didn't really know much about Halloween. By the way, Torrin, you look like a young Tony Blair. I have to tell you, like a Margaret Thatcher, you look like a young Tony Blair.
Can I just say I have
agree with that.
I have actually been called that in the past, so I'm.
I fully agree with that.
Well, I don't know about a Halloween thing, but if I had to, a politician, I mean, that's such a random question, never thought of it, but a politician that I admired in my youth and actually still rate, and he would turn in his grave over Corbyn, would be a chap called Crossan, Anthony Crossan. He was, there were a really series of heavyweight Labour thinkers that came out of the Second World War. I mean, major politicians. One of them was Anthony Crossan. For those of you really into politics will know that he was quite a big figure for Labour in many years. But anyway, I suppose I'd go as him simply because it's such a random question and I rated him so highly, and it would be good for younger people today to perhaps remember some of the really quite significant Labour figures of the past compared to perhaps their less significant numbers today.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic answer. Izzy, who would you go as political figure from the last 100 years for a Halloween party?
Oh, this one's really difficult. I was expecting something along the lines of tiramisu again. I think Torrin's kind of taken my answer for Margaret Thatcher. Not because I look like her, and I do not agree with a lot of her standpoints, but I do admire how headstrong she was and how persistent she was with her campaigns. I like to think that I'm also very headstrong and persistent, so I think that would be my answer, but maybe not Margaret Thatcher though.
Pair of Margaret Thatchers. Well, that's something I didn't expect as an answer to this question. Pushkin, coming back to you, have you, or would you still like to defer?
There's no right answer. I feel I could say, and someone could pick it apart. I'm going to go more of a modern politician. I think this is going to sound really weird, but I quite like Lisa Nandy. I would have liked her to have been elected leader of the Labour Party. I haven't kept an eye on her recently, but I quite liked her leadership campaign, and I'm quite used to dressing up as a woman in school plays. I mean, throughout the entirety of my life, every school play I've been in, I don't know if it's like the comedy of the fact that I'm like a 6 foot, like relatively broad-shouldered bloke, so it's a bit weird. But I've always been cast as a woman, and I quite like the makeup as well. So I think I'd be more than comfortable going as a woman. So I think I'd perhaps take Lisa Nandy. She's quite, Andy Burnham. I mean, they're both. I quite like them both actually. So yeah, those are my choices really.
Two Margaret Thatchers, a Lisa Nandy or an Andy Burnham, and Tony Crossan. Well, that's certainly an interesting way to end my questions. We're going to go over to the Q&A section now. Oh, Matthew has already got a question, so I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, just to answer that last question, if I might, considering it's Halloween, and there was it was always said that there was something of the night about Michael Howard, I'd go as Count Dracula, aka Michael Howard.
Very good.
The serious question I'd like to ask is, what more can be done by social media companies to better ensure that they aren't perpetuators of people feeling bad about themselves and poor mental health? Thinking of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And the reason that I ask this is that I often think that there's at least two things that social media companies do wrong in this regard. They enable people to promote a kind of, especially on things like Instagram, a kind of perfect life. Look at us having our perfect, wonderful holidays and everything is perfect. And you don't get to see that actually life isn't always like that. Life can sometimes be nice. Life can sometimes even be glamorous, but a lot of the time it's not. It's difficult and it's painful and all the rest of it. So there's that, and also the fact that social media companies allow, and I'm all for free speech so far as it goes, but I also think there's a line where social media companies allow often the most vile of things to be said, and there seems to be little action. And I even saw a quote from Nick Clegg, formerly of the Lib Dem parish, now of Meter, we have to say, don't we? Where he said, "Oh well, we just reflect society," as if that was kind of an answer to anything being said, because well, we're just reflecting society. So my question is, what more should social media companies be doing? Thanks.
Excellent question, Matthew. Torin, I think you would like to have a crack at this first.
Yeah, and I'll say it from my own experience, actually. So my own experience is in part running Centre's social media. And the one thing that you sort of start to learn about the algorithms behind them is how, if you post something just at the right level between being completely obnoxious and something no one would agree with, and with something that is a sort of positive message and that sort of thing, if you post something in the middle that is just enough to get discussed about, you will find the number of likes that individual post gets is enormous. And this can happen in multiple ways. It can be very, very serious. It can be things that effectively go to the level of hate speech. Or you can find, as I did one morning waking up, that a map of what a federal UK could look like, of which I made for Twitter, ended up being viewed some beyond 50,000 times. And I was thinking, okay, well, how is this possible? With what you sort of put on social media. And the reason is that generating some kind of controversy is effectively reflects well in algorithms, and it is sort of is bounced by social media companies. It's that engagement is getting comments, it's getting likes and so on, which is why posts will be pushed up that shouldn't necessarily be there, and it in that sense helps those people who are more on the extreme sides of politics and those people who are sort of in the center ground. So I think in part it's about sort of regulation, honestly, because we haven't really got there with social media companies yet. There's been a huge number of ideas put around about how we sort of regulate social media companies properly. Do we give people more agency over their own data that they're giving to these social media companies? So yeah, honestly, in terms of social media, I think it's about starting to regulate, because we haven't really done a good enough job of ensuring that they are, on the one hand, tackling hate speech and so on, but also about just the basics of pushing up any post that creates controversy, and therefore it does give a much more extended voice to those who create controversy, rather than, on the other hand, of course, creating a sort of fairer platform, especially if it's sort of reflecting society as we're supposedly told. Well, you're not reflecting society if you basically created a system that just takes anything controversial and pushes it up, because that will in itself almost make society reflect that. But I will not go on for too long, because I think I can go on for hours about this.
Before we go on to Nicola's question, I think Nicola's got a question or a comment. Would anybody else from the panel like to respond to Matthew's question? Stephen, if you could go first.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a really, really important question, and it's entirely relevant to today. It really is. I think there are two things that will improve it. One, I think we need to remove anonymity from Twitter, but, and there's a big but here, and it must be able to be done technically, there must be a way that you can retain anonymity in countries where if you don't retain anonymity, you'll be put behind bars. But I do believe that anonymity allows some folks, sadly, the freedom to be even more vile than they would be without anonymity. So that, I think, is something to look at. I actually also do agree with Torin around regulation. As a small L liberal, I'm kind of, I don't head towards regulation first off, but this is just getting out of hand. I mean, particularly I see with so many youngsters and young women with Instagram and what have you, and the level of bullying, it is just unbelievable. I mean, sad to say, where Cleggie is right is that social media, which was seen as a great leveler, has allowed us as humans, I'm not going to throw stones, I'm just saying us as humans, pander to some of our own basest motives in the most appalling way. It has been quite shattering for me to observe the last 20 years, you know. And I, you know, as a politician, I received 10 tons of abuse, but I can disconnect myself from that. But for a lot of civilians, for the sake of a better word, I mean, I just think it's wicked beyond extreme. So the answer, remove anonymity, other than in areas that are under dictatorships, include Hungary, God's sake, part of the EU, where's that heading? But also it needs the algorithms, it needs stricter regulation. It is coming. Zuckerberg knows this. You know, Congress is winding itself up, I think, to seriously look at the techs in the way that they looked at the monopolies at the turn of the 20th century in America, Standard Oil, etc., etc. So it is coming. If they have any wit, and I think they do, they will get their houses more in order beforehand. But if they don't, not only something must be done, something will be done, because it is damaging so many people, and I particularly feel for a lot of the youngsters caught in the firestorm.
I think that's it. Great response. Stephen, Pushkin, if you could answer Matthew's question, and then we'll go on to Nicholas' question.
Stephen covers a lot of points I want to make, and Matthew's question is very good indeed, and a very good choice for Halloween as well, actually. But I'd like to say, yeah, I agree. I think these social media companies, and personally, my view on Nick Clegg is he sold himself out essentially to Meta, and I'm very disappointed in what he's done, and I think it's a shame, really. But yeah, he sold himself out essentially. But I think the worrying thing is about sort of like Meta, and I mean, you can see this with TikTok, for instance. You go on TikTok, loads of young people use TikTok, loads of people use TikTok. You know, it's a direct thing of the algorithm just feeds into what you want to see, and it boxes you into this corner of it, just reinforces everything you want to believe. It traps you in this constant algorithm of reading, predicting what you want to see. And like Torrin said, it's the controversial things that you'll constantly see. It's the negative things, the things that get attention. These companies have a positive incentive to put the nice things out there, to really improve people's mental health and look after its users. They have no incentive to do that, because why would they want that? That would cost them a minute amount of the billions they earn, but it would still cost them, and they're very incentivized. So I'd say, I mean, it's scary, things like Meta. They're massive monopolies, and they have a warring amount of power, and they're all the wrong incentives to promote bad things, promote controversial things, to promote the wrong things on social media, and create algorithms that don't work in favor of its users. So I agree with Stephen. I think we're hopefully going to, I think part of the issue that we don't have politicians who understand, we rarely have politicians who really understand social media. But I think as politicians begin to understand it more, and we stop treating these companies as some form of allies or neutrally, we need to treat them as, as they have a social responsibility, and we need to regulate them as such. And I hope Stephen's right. I hope Congress gets its stuff together. I hope the UK gets its stuff together, breaks up these monopolies, works with America to break up these monopolies, and really regulate strongly these social media companies, because I mean the effect is wide reaching, and I mean it's too much to cover in my mental health paper. It would need a whole separate paper of itself to deal with that. I'm going to put my hands up and say I couldn't even begin to tell you where the regulation should begin, but hopefully consult with the right experts that will be on the right direction with that, hopefully.
That's a great answer, Pushkin. I hope that the responses answered your question, Matthew. Fantastic, right? I'll now go on to Nicola's question. The floor is yours, Nicola, if you'd like to ask your question.
It's not actually a question, it's more of a comment on what was just being discussed. First of all, I think that one of the problems with dealing with online abuse and the the nature of social media being so adversarial is that I believe that is one of the things that drives their profits. There are people who, I know a lot of people who will only use social media, Twitter, for example, to basically vent their spleen about politics in the UK or the situation in the UK. And so I think it will have to be regulated. There's no way these platforms are ever going to make any changes otherwise. The thing with anonymity, I have been on the receiving end of a lot of abuse, to the level of police being involved, and I have an issue with anonymity in the sense that it should be possible, if people are committing crimes, harassment and stalking and malcoms, that they can be tracked, they can be found. The issue at the moment is that, for example, Twitter will only work with the UK police if there is a safeguarding issue. So I, as an adult, don't count as a safeguarding issue. So it doesn't matter what it's doing to my mental health, they will not cooperate. So those sort of things have to change. Now, the anonymity thing, I do have a slight issue with saying only countries where people have to have anonymity, because there are people who live in the UK who also need to be anonymous on social media for a variety of reasons. So I think it would have to be something in which it is possible to be, I don't know how to put this, but the public face is anonymous, but there is a mechanism for that you are not anonymous to the platform, and the platform is required to provide that information should it be required by authorities, etc. So I think that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you are excluding quite a big group of people who do have to be anonymous on social media for various reasons. Yeah, that was it, really.
Thank you for that comment, Nicola. I think you had a very interesting perspective, and also, as you say, some people in the UK do need anonymity for a variety of reasons. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question at all? Okay, I think that we'll wrap up then, because we have slightly gone over time anyway. But I'd like to thank our panel, Izzy, Torin, Pushkin and Stephen, for being on this event, for discussing Pushkin's paper and discussing it in great depth and detail. I thank the audience for coming along. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I think, and I hope, a lot of people have got things out of it. We're going to be announcing some more events in due course, so make sure to check them out when they are going to be on, and keep looking at Centre's website and the Twitter page. A recording of this event will be up somewhere, or clips of it will be up somewhere, whether on the website or on YouTube. So thanks once again for all coming. I hope you have a great rest of the day and you come to the next Centre event. Okay, bye-bye.